2 Samuel chapter number 6. Where we're at in David's life is he has set up his kingdom, or in the process of setting up his kingdom. And as he has come now to the city of David, Jebus, as it once was called, but now it's been conquered, and he's setting up his kingdom, he finds a priority of something that's missing that he wants to bring back. He wants to set some things in order, and that's what we're going to pick up tonight in chapter 6. Now, through our study tonight, we're going to look at the entire chapter, but for our passage this evening, go ahead down to verse number 12. We'll read verse 12 through verse 18. I'll read it out loud, and you can follow along. 2 Samuel chapter 6, starting in verse number 12. The Bible says, "Now it was told King David, saying, The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought the ark of the God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. And so it was, when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. Then David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. Now as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts." Tonight I want to speak on this. Bring God back. Bring God back. He was the first one to graduate from his entire family. So working 11 hours a day, Otis gathered enough money to purchase his class ring of 1967 from Jasper High School down in Alabama. After graduating, he was off to the army, but not before giving his class ring to his sweetheart, Melinda. After a day at the lake together, the ring slipped off Melinda's finger and was lost in the water, where it stayed at the bottom of the lake for over 5 decades. But 7 months ago, a man with a metal detector was searching in the same lake and found the very ring that was lost. After doing some research, he tracked down Otis, who had his initials engraved in the ring. Showing up at his door 55 years later, Otis and his wife Melinda were reunited with the ring that was lost so long ago. Finally, after 55 years, that ring was now on the hand that it was originally intended to be on. You know, there's something that's relieving, that takes the stress and a weight off your shoulders when stuff is put back in its place. When something that is lost is found. When you restore back to what it should have been, something that was gone or lost. There's a relief. Have you ever lost something? Then you know what I'm talking about. Where's my keys? Where's my card? Where's my wallet? And you're searching and searching, and all of a sudden when you find it, there's a, oh, great, I feel better. Now everything is where it's supposed to be. But in the middle of when it's lost, man, there's a little bit of panic. Nothing is right. Everything is out of order. It's all out of sorts, and that's where David is right now. David is in the midst of setting up his kingdom and establishing how he's going to rule his kingdom, but something is not right. The ark of God is not here. And David says, I'm going to make this my priority. As I'm setting up my kingdom, I'm going to set in priority this thing, that God is going to be the center of my kingdom, be the center of my rule, and it's going to be evident, not just in my life, but in the kingdom's life. So in 2 Samuel chapter 6, which is the passage we'll be studying tonight, there's 3 stories in this. Number 1, there's the story of the failed attempt to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. And then there's the successful attempt that they finally did bring it back to Jerusalem. And then at the end of the chapter, there is this interaction between David and Michal. It gets pretty tense. But in these three stories, we really see one major theme. And that's this, that God is worthy to be in the center, and He needs to be in the center of your life. So David endeavors on this journey to bring God back. It's going to be a long journey, a journey with lessons, but he is determined that, listen, I'm not going to set up a kingdom unless God is in the center. And I hope that's true for you today. As you craft and shape your life, no matter what stage you're in, I want you to think of what is most important. And I'll tell you what's most important is that God is at the center of your life, your spouse's life, your family, your home, your community, even your church. And you should have a determination like David to say, I am going to make sure that God is at the center. The beautiful thing is that as a Christian, those of us that know God can have God in the middle, ruling, deciding, guiding, teaching, showing. We don't have to figure this out on our own. We have a God that can do that for us. And we don't have to feel like all the pressure is on me to figure it out, and all the pressure is on me to smooth out that relationship and figure out the finances and make sure my kids are raised right and smooth this entire life over. No, we just say, God, I'm going to put you in the center and you can take care of those things. All I have to do is follow. It's a beautiful thing as a Christian, and so don't fight it. Don't fight it. Say, God, I want you to be in the center. The reality is that you can choose who sits on your throne, but you can't choose how they rule. You can choose who sits on your throne, but you cannot choose how they rule. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, I'll tell you this, there's somebody who wants to sit on the throne. That's God. But oftentimes what we do is we say, no, God, I don't want you really to be the center. I'm actually more concerned, and I prioritize the things of the world, actually, what I can enjoy, the things I can consume, the things around me, the popularity, the friends that I can have, and those things are more important to me, and so I'm going to put those at the top, and I'm going to shove down the other things, which would include you, God. Maybe the world is at your center. Maybe it's your pride, and everything else gets shoved down. Maybe it's you. You said, Brother Levi, you said you can choose who sits on your throne, but you can't choose how they rule. Oh, no, that's true. That's true. Even you. Because if you sat on the throne, you would be consumed with who you are, which is lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, who you are, your personality, your reputation, those around you, your popularity. Those things would consume you. You say, no, they wouldn't. Yes, they would. How do I know that? Well, the beautiful contrast right here, chapter 6, is that King Saul tried that. You realize that the ark was not in the kingdom during Saul's reign? Saul said, I'm going to run things how I want. I want to sit on the throne. And man, he did. He did what he wanted. He bought what he wanted. He went where he wanted. He had relationships with who he wanted. And what did he say at the end? You know what he said. It was all vanity. So you can sit on the throne if you want, but you cannot choose how you rule. And I'll tell you this. If you pick that God sits on the throne, you also didn't get to choose how he rules. He is sovereign. But when he's on the throne, he can bring a life of joy, of peace, of purpose, of substance. Everything that Saul thought he could bring to himself was vanity. But when you put God in the center, he can bring what you can't. In this passage tonight, I really want to walk through the whole chapter, and I'm excited to do so because it all really ties together about bringing God back and setting him really in the center. And so what we're going to look at tonight is really 3 progressive developments in bringing God back. 3 progressive developments in bringing God back. So let's look at the first one together. The first one is this, that there is an intentional vision to see God centered. There's an intentional vision to see God centered. David does this in a wonderful way. So in 2 Samuel chapter 6, there is another account of this same story in 1 Chronicles. And so when you look at those 2 stories together, they parallel in a lot of ways. But the first verse in chapter 6 says this. It says, again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring from there the ark of God, whose name was called the Lord of hosts, who dwelt between the cherubims. In 1 Chronicles chapter 13, he goes to the leaders and he counsels, he says, hey guys, listen, there's something that's missing here, and what's missing is that God's presence, the ark, which is what that represented, it represented God's reputation and God's presence. He said it's not here. And before we even set this whole thing up, before we even start ruling, that's what is priority. So let's get together, let's gather everyone up, let's go down, and let's bring it back. He casted this vision. He saw the need. So my question to you tonight is, do you see the need? As I said just a moment ago, this ark had not been present in the kingdom for almost 70 years. Before the reign of Saul, during the reign of Saul, about 10 years since the reign of Saul, it sat in a home. Outside of one exception, Saul kind of called for it, but outside of one exception, it's been 70 years, and the need was so great. David says, how have we missed it for so long? How have we let it just kind of slip past our priorities? How has it flown under the radar that we don't have God's presence here with us? Do we think that we can do this on our own? Do we think that we can rule a kingdom? Do we think we can go forward as a nation on our own? He saw the need and called the leaders together and says, guys, we got to go get this. Get the Levites, get the priests, get everyone together, and we're going to go down and we're going to bring it out. Somehow they got sidetracked. Their focus veered. But don't be so hard on them, because that can happen to us too, can't it? Things in life come up. Things in family come up. Things that we think are more of a priority come up, and all of a sudden we say, I got to get to the game, and I got to get to this, and I got to get to that, and there's something going on at school, and then I run the kids here, and the parents, their schedule is busy. They've got work and kids and school and programs to attend and games to go watch, and all of a sudden you have your routine at night, and we come home and we do this, then we're in bed, and all of a sudden you filled your life up. 70 years later, God's nowhere to be found. They have veered off track and they lost focus. I know that this can be something that we'd look at the life of a parent and say, yeah, it'd be really easy, but also I remember the life as a teenager. You have things in your life that you think are important, right? Man, you've got those friends you've got to go hang out with. You've got schoolwork that you got to do. You've got games that you got to attend. Maybe there's a concert or people are hanging out at the mall and you got to go there. Maybe you got a job or you got to go to Starbucks. And all of a sudden, all these things start piling up too. And guess what? Your life pushes God out. Wouldn't it be amazing if tonight we assessed our lives and say, what really is sitting on the throne? What is telling me what to do? Is it my job? Is it my friends? Is it my time? Is it my busy schedule? Is that what's telling me what to do? Is there's God sitting on the throne? Man, David says, I see the need here. And let's push everything else aside and let's bring God back. David not only saw the need, but then he prepared to bring the ark. Now, there's a few verses here in chapter number 6, in verse 17. It talks about him. I'll read it for you out loud here. It says, so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. In 1 Chronicles chapter 16 and 15, it talks about this. David prepared a place for the ark. Why? Because remember, he's going to bring it to the city of David, but he had just conquered it. There was no place for it. There was no temple. There was no tabernacle. And so David said, hey, if I'm going to bring God back, we got to back up a few steps and say, if he's going to come and be a part of my life and be in the center of the kingdom and be the priority, I'm going to have to prepare some things before he gets here. Now, often a lot of us are like, hurrah at the first step, bring God back. I see the need. But we're not willing to prepare. What do you have to do to bring God back? What steps do you have to take to make room, to make room for God to be back in your life? And maybe it's not God is out of your life, but maybe he's just drop down a couple rungs on priority. See, what David had to do, it says, wait, we're going to bring God back, and we're going to do this. So we're going to build a tent. We're going to build this tabernacle, this place of dwelling, and we're going to build this up because when we bring God back, He's going to have a spot. And I'm going to make preparations right now for Him to be in the center. So let me ask you, what are you doing to make sure that God is that top priority in the center of your life? Let me ask it to you this way. What tents do you need to erect for God to be center? Maybe it's some things you need to tear down. Maybe some things you need to get rid of. Maybe some things you need to have some hard conversations and say, hey, look, I've really put this ahead of our family, and I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to put our priorities in order, and the first thing at the top is God. And we're going to bring God back to this family. We're going to bring God back to our relationships. We're going to bring God back to our child rearing. We're going to bring God back to our schedule. And when you bring God back to the schedule, you're going to have to make some room. You're going to have to prepare. You have to clear some things out and build a tent and say, God, I want you here, and I'm going to prepare for you to be here. Let's bring God back. First, there's intentional vision to see God centered. David says, we got to give Him back. He saw the need, and he prepared to bring God back. But look at number 2. There was a righteous compliance to make God centered. So there was an intentional vision to see God centered, but then there was a righteous compliance to make God centered. Now, I told you there was 3 stories in this chapter. The first story was the failed attempt to bring God back. And we're going to look at that for just a moment because there's some aspects in here that I think we could learn some really important lessons from. And so starting in verse number 3 of this same chapter, chapter 6, here's what the Bible said. It says, so they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. Now you may read this and think, oh, what's the big deal? They went to go get the ark of God and they put it on a cart to bring it back to the city of David. This seems great, but it wasn't. You see, God had given specific instructions on how the ark of God was to be transported. There were steps and rules, and one of those rules in Leviticus, or Numbers chapter 3, was that they were to use poles to carry the ark of God. But what did they do here? They put it on a cart. You think, whoa, what's going on here? Whoa, David, priest, you know this, right? You know you're supposed to carry this, but you put it on a cart. Where do we see this? Well, remember I told you the ark wasn't in the presence of the kingdom for over 70 years. Well, the way that it got to Abinadab's house, which is where they're going to pick it up from, Abinadab's house, the way it got there was because the Philistines had it before. They had the ark of God. You remember the story where they had the ark of God and they put it in the temple with their god, Dagon, and they woke up the next day and Dagon was on his face and they thought, oh no, so they lift Dagon, their god, back up and they come back the next day and he's fallen over again, his hands are broken, and they think, oh no, we're going to send this to another city. And they send it to another city, and God sends plagues to that city. They send it to another city. God sends plagues there. And they try that over and over again. They say, we got to get rid of this. So what do? They build a new cart with 2 cows and peace offerings, and they send it off. David, where did you get this idea? Priest, where did you get this idea? I know you're excited and you're ready to bring God back, but you don't do it this way. Can I tell you this? A lot of us are ready, willing, excited to bring God back, but we can't do that on our own terms. God doesn't play by our rules. When we bring God back, it's His way and on His terms. You say, why was this so intense? Well, as we read a little bit more of the story here, as we go down a couple of verses, verse number 6 says, and when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Okay, well, let's back up for a second. Who was this guy named Uzzah? Well, Uzzah was actually the grandson of Eleazar. You say, who was that? Well, when the ark came from the Philistines, remember that story, came over to Abinadab's house, his son was Eleazar. And Eleazar was anointed to be over the ark. He was to minister with the ark. And so he did all the rituals, he took care of the ark, and his grandsons were Uzzah and Ahio, the two that were watching the ark as it went down on the new cart. So what do you mean by that? Well, all that to say this. Uzzah grew up around the ark of God. It was in his house. From when he was a kid, his dad knew about it. He was a minister to the ark. His grandpa knew about it. He was Eleazar. He ministered to the ark when it first got there. It was in Abinadab's house for years. And Uzzah was comfortable with it. Uzzah had been around the ark his entire life. And now they were moving the ark. In his comfortableness, he thought, I've been around it my whole life. I have no problem. Nothing bad has ever happened before. I'm really comfortable with this thing. And all of a sudden, he steps out and reaches his hand and touches the ark, and God instantly kills him. Right there, the Bible says, right next to the ark, he died. You say, whoa, what are you saying? Here's what I'm saying. Is when we come to God and say, God, I want you to be in the center of my life, it is on His terms. But be careful, those of you that have been around God your entire life. You get really comfortable with how you think things work. You get really comfortable. Have you ever heard this, that familiarity breeds contempt? I'm really familiar with how this Christian thing works. I'm familiar with how this church thing works. And all of a sudden you say, God, I want you to be in the center of my life. And you start to force things into the center of your life, and you say, God, I want you to rule, but I really have my pride. God, I want you to rule, but I really want this. God, I want you to rule, but I really want to hold on to this relationship. God, I want you to rule, and your familiarity with God has gotten to the point where it becomes a irreverence. And he lost the respect for who God was. Remember, the ark of God represented his reputation and his presence. And Uzzah thought, I can cross the line here and I'll be okay. And he couldn't. So be very careful, those of us who think, I know how this works. Be very careful, because God says, if I'm going to come in the center of life, it's going to be on my terms. And you will have to conform to how I want things to be run. And that may look like you have to shift your life around and move things here and move things there. But guess what? It is worth it. And if you're trying to force God in, it's not going to work. He was really comfortable with the ark of God. Verse 8 goes on to say, we get a little bit of a reaction here from David now. Verse 8 says, well, let's start in verse number 7. The Bible says, then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. And David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. When you read that, you see David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. Don't be mistaken here. David was not angry at God. He was angry at himself. Yes, the result was that Uzzah died. And David was so frustrated, he's probably blaming himself, thinking, David, this was careless of you. You should have known better. You had the priests around you, but this is on you, David. And he was angered, not at God, but angered at the result. You say, how could that be? Well, just like this, if I were to get on the road tonight and I were to speed and I were to get a ticket, and a cop comes up and says, you were speeding. I'm like, oh, I was. Well, I can be upset that I got a ticket, but I can't blame the cop. I have to blame myself. I was the one speeding. And David, in his responsibility, says, I should not have done that. David's anger was at himself. He says, a man has died because we didn't take the proper steps. And if you read the story, David was so excited and enthusiastic, and that excitement, the dancing, Even the first time when they started to bring the ark back and the music was not enough, their enthusiasm did not overpower the righteousness that they should have attained. That step that they should have taken. That precaution of saying, how does God want me to do this? That outbreak against Uzzah. In this we see that there was a proper reverence the second time. Unfortunately, after Uzzah died, the excitement of bringing the ark back to Jerusalem was crushed. The excitement, the music stopped. And what was supposed to be a day of celebration turned into a day of a funeral. And David says, I can't bring the ark back here now. I've made a breach against God, and Uzzah is dead, and now there needs to be a funeral, and there was a day of excitement, and now it's a day of mourning, and I'm not going to bring the ark back. And they pause, and they throw the ark. They say, listen, it's not going to come here. We're going to put it in another place for now. In the home of Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom, you keep it, and in time, we'll bring it in. So there it stays for 3 months in the home of Obed-Edom. And the beautiful thing is that now David hears that there is blessing. There's blessing. King, you know that house that we put the ark in? Well, Obed-Edom, he's being blessed in his household, and everyone's doing well, and everything that's in his house is being blessed. And David hears this and says, wait, well, let's bring it here. If there's blessing to be had, why not have it here? There was some messenger that came to David and says, David, God is blessing. And David said, let's bring it here. And listen, tonight, this messenger is me to you, saying, if God's not in the center of your life, there's blessings to be had. There's peace to be had. There's a decompression. There's a release when God is on the throne, and you don't have to be the one that's in charge, and you don't have to be the one that has to figure it out. And I'm telling you tonight, just like this messenger told the king, there's peace, and you can have it. And David immediately says, let's go down and get it. Well, as you guess, this time David goes down, and they carry it the right way. He says in 1 Chronicles, the way he words this is interesting. He says, for because you did not do it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us because we did not consult him about the proper order. So the priests and the Levites sanctified themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord of God. And the children of the Levites bore the ark on their shoulders by its poles, as Moses had commanded according to the word of God. This time they went down, and there was music, and there was rejoicing. Because God was brought back and brought into the center on God's terms. Verse number 17 really is the crowning jewel of this entire chapter. Let me read it again. We've read it a couple times. It says, so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place, in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. This is the only place that God should take in your life. You say, what's God's place in my life? Should it be that He is a part of my life? No. Should it be that I consult Him about my life? No. God should be in the center. Do you know what it says here? It says, in its place. That is its rightful place. And as you as a Christian, a believer, claim to know God, there's only one place that God should take in your life, and it's at the top, and it's in the center, and it's in its place. And because you have prepared a room, David erected this tabernacle for it. He says, and when we bring this to its place, we're going to set it right in the center, because that's where He belongs. And if He's anywhere else in your life than in the center, He is in the wrong place. They brought it back. They put it in the center. But the story doesn't end here. There was music and rejoicing and dancing. It was an amazing time. But I told you there really was another story in chapter 6. As David comes back, we see, number one, there was an intentional vision to see God-centered. Number two, the righteous compliance to make God-centered. But lastly tonight, there was a dedicated adherence to keep God-centered. You and I know that it's sometimes easy to start something, it's easy to do something, but the tougher thing in life is to have consistency and finish. Consistency and finish. And David says, we're going to bring God back because there's a need. We're going to make a place for him. He's going to go right in the center. But then he says, I'm going to make it so that we have accountability, that he stays there. Here's what he does. Is when he comes back, David makes himself accountable to the people with putting himself out amongst the people, saying, I agree with this. I am here, and I am here for this, for the ark to come back, and I'm going to stand right beside, and I'm going to sing because I agree. I'm going to dance because that's how, in that culture, that's how they express themselves when they're very passionate about something, especially religious aspects, is they would dance. And so he says, I'm going to dance and show my approval that this is the center, and we're going to make this a center. I'm going to be here, and you all can watch me. I'm going to walk with it the whole time. The Bible says after the first 6 paces, when they started from Obed-Edom's house to bring it to the city of David, they sacrificed after the first 6 steps. He says, I'm going to sacrifice, and you're going to watch. I'm going to be next to it, and you're going to watch. I'm going to dance, and you're going to watch. Later on, the Bible tells us that when he comes into the city, he starts to hand out cakes and meats and raisins. And he says, hey, listen, we're going to celebrate together because I'm not just going to make this an obscure thing that happened, maybe in your memory that you might forget. I'm going to make it so it's permanent, public accountability that I am bringing God here and he's going to stay here. And you can hold me accountable. That's what David wants to do. Can I tell you that that's what we need? In our flesh, we don't like accountability, do we? We like to be able to say no at any time. We don't like to be held responsible for anything. We like this gravy place where, I don't know what that means, gravy place. We like this comfortable place where we can say, yeah, I'll kind of commit, but I want to back out at any time. That's not how it works. God wants commitment, and David says, you can hold me accountable. Everyone that's around me, watch me. There is this public accountability. I mean, this is so much evident, just like in baptism. We've had people baptized just last week. What are they saying? They're saying, hey, I made a personal decision in my heart to follow God. It's private, but I want to make it public because I want you all to see that I'm accountable to saying I'm following Jesus. I identify with Jesus. I identify with his message, with his gospel, with his person. What he says, right, I agree with, and I'm making it evident and publicly accountable to you. And when you join a church membership, that's what you're saying, is saying, hey, I'm putting myself under the accountability of you so that I can keep myself pure and accountable, and you can speak into my life. I want God to stay in the center. Why would you make yourself accountable? Because you really do want God to stay at the center. But not only does David do this in a public manner, he does this in a personal manner. This is the last thing we'll talk about tonight as we kind of conclude this chapter, this very unique interaction between David and his wife. Now, you may have read this story before and very interested in what it has to do with this story of bringing God back. You might think, what does it have to do? Well, let's read it here together, and then we're going to walk through it. It says, let's start in verse number 20. It says, then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. So David said to Michal, it was before the Lord, who chose me instead of your father and all of his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord of Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord, and I will even be more undignified than this, and will be humbled in my own sight. But for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. See, when David came home after bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, he was probably on a high. Man, this is great. His friends were around him. Just gave out a bunch of stuff to people, cakes, and we partied. We had music, and people were playing trumpets, and we were rejoicing. We were dancing around the ark. And he comes home to his wife, and he says, "Hey, we just brought the ark back." David probably thinking, "Man, the ark blessed Obed-Edom's household. I'm expecting the same thing from my household." He is greeted with a wife that the Bible says had despised him in her heart. And using sarcasm, she addresses her husband, the king of Israel, with sarcasm. She says, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, that he uncovered himself before the maids." Now, when you first read this, the first thing you might lend yourself to thinking is that, oh man, there was some element that was inappropriate here of what she was talking about, and she had a right to really come to David and address this. Maybe you've heard that before, but I don't think that's what it's teaching. You see, as you look at the passage here and you look at what the theme is, what is really being brought out here is not that there was a problem with dancing or that there was some kind of lewd problem with nakedness. That's not what it was. It's that Michal in her heart looked at what David was doing and thought, "David, you're supposed to be the king of Israel. You're supposed to be righteous and pompous, and people are supposed to bow down before you. You're conquering nations, you're conquering cities, and you're supposed to be the king. You're supposed to be up above them all. And look at you, David." In verse 14 it says, David wore a linen ephod. You know what she was worried about? "David, you took off your royal clothes and you put on a linen ephod. David, you're supposed to be the king. Maybe you're supposed to be riding on a horse and you're down there dancing and having a fun time. And David, you're supposed to be more dignified than this." And in her heart, what she was saying is, "David, you should be on the throne." No. When she comes and says, "You've uncovered yourself before the maids of your servants," here's what she was saying. She was saying, even the lowest people in the kingdom, your servants, their maids, don't even respect you. She was an arrogancy bringing this up to David, and David is sitting here listening to this, thinking in his head, whoa, you got this all wrong. No, I did take off my royal clothes, and I did go into the streets, and I was among the people, and I was among the servants, and I was among the slaves, and we were rejoicing together because it's not about me. It's about him. It's about bringing him back. It's about bringing him to the center. And you've got it all wrong, Michal. She comes down in this verse, and she says, "As one of the base fellows uncovers himself." What was she saying? Well, the base fellow, that word right there, actually is repeated in the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 5, when there was the warning against saying "Raka" against your brother, Jesus warned against that. That's this right here. It means emptiness. And in this culture, especially the Jewish culture, if you wanted to have the largest disrespect to anybody, if you wanted to have the largest slam against a man, what you would do was call him empty, a base fellow. She said, "David, you're not worth anything because you're supposed to be king and you're making yourself not in royal apparel, and you just, not even the maids respect you." He says, whoa, listen. I want you to hear David's response. It says, "So David said to Michal, 'It was before the Lord.'" David's saying this was not a performance. This was not for you. This was not for the people. This was not for the maids. This was not for anybody. It's because I truly want God to be center. And if I'm going to say, "God, you are center," then what I have to do, listen, don't lose this. If I want God to be center, if I want God to be king, if I want God to be at the top, then what I'm going to have to do is take myself off the throne, humble myself so he can be in his spot. Listen, you've heard this before. putting somebody in their place. Maybe you've done that. Well, most of the time when we say put somebody in their place, what we mean is knock them down a few notches. But when we put God in his place, he always has to go up a few notches. And if we're going to put God in his place, we have to come down. And David in this verse says, listen, I will be more undignified than this. I will humble myself more than this. I will be humble in my eyes. Although I've been called to be the king, he looks at Michal and says, your father was king, but God chose me over him to rule over his people. And I was chosen to be king, but I will be more undignified. I will be less honored so he can be more honored. I will be humbled in my sight so he can be lifted up. I will be what I need to be so he can be in his place. And man, if that's not your spirit, we're missing something tonight. If you're saying, no, I want to vie for position at the top, then we're in the wrong position. God has to be at the top. And David says, Michal, I don't get it. The question that comes to my mind is, where was she? When everybody went off to have music and dancing and party and excitement about bringing God back, where was she? In a room? Looking out the window? With bitterness? Resentment? Because she obviously was not ready. She was not willing to put God in her place. And David was. Let me ask you tonight, where are you? Maybe you hear a message like this and you think, you know what, I just don't like that. I just don't like people telling me that I need to take it down a little bit and put God in his place. Where are you? Are you in the street rejoicing? Singing praises to God? Or are you up in the bedroom looking out the window thinking, this ain't right. I should be up there. David, you should be dressed in royal apparel. Michal had it all wrong. David made God centered in a public way, in a personal way. He was determined. He says, listen, this is how it's going to be. I will be humbled and he will be lifted up. In 1990, American sprinter Carl Lewis was favored to win the 100-meter dash at the World Championships in Rome. However, his rival, Jamaican sprinter Lyndon Christie, unexpectedly took the gold medal, leaving Lewis in second place. Lewis was bitter about the loss and accused Christie of using performance-enhancing drugs, which Christie denied. His bitterness lingered for years, and he continued to make public accusations against Christie. Meanwhile, Christie went on to win several more championships, solidifying his place as one of the greatest sprinters in history. Lewis eventually apologized for his behavior, acknowledging that his bitterness had consumed him. You can't have the pleasure of being center and have the benefits of God being on the throne. You hear what I'm saying? You can't say, I want to be calling the shots, but I want God to bless what I'm doing. No, if you want him to be center, you've got to move out of the way and let him be center. It's exactly what we need tonight. You can choose who sits on the throne, but you can't choose how they rule. So I think the decision really we need tonight is that we need to decide to bring God back. Maybe he's drifted. Maybe he's gone down a couple notches in priority. But we need to bring God back and let it be evident. Let's have some accountability around us that God is going to stay in the center. Really, I have a couple questions tonight as we are about to go to prayer in just a moment. Number one, as you think about these while you pray, do you see the need to bring God back into the center of your life? Is there a need to place him back on the throne? Number two, have you prepared for him to be in the center of your life? Maybe there's some tents that you need to make, some preparation. Have you prepared? Number three, are you trying to bring God back on your own terms? Because it won't work. It won't work. Number four, are you dedicated to keeping God in the center? Placing accountability around you, public, private. So let's bring God back. We're going to take a few minutes here. We got just